So let's get started. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our GRC coffee chat. Thank you for starting your day with us. We're really excited to have you here. My name is Rachel Zamsky, and I'm the marketing specialist at Aqueduct Technologies. I just want to note that today's call is being recorded. We want to keep this interactive, so if at any point you have a question for Rick or for Dave, just type it in the Q&A box and we can answer those live for you or at the end of the chat. And without further ado, Rick, the floor is yours if you'd like to introduce yourself and our guest for today.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I am your host, Rick Beaupre. We've been doing this monthly for all of 23 and 24, and it's been a great series. Every month I'm joined by various guests, and this month I'm excited to be joined by Dave Phillips, who is our Field CISO and really leads the way on our GRC Excellence program. So good morning, Dave.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, Dave's been doing this, what'd you say, 20 years or so in this industry and all things governance, risk and compliance.
Feels like too long, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so today's session, your roadmap to governance, risk and compliance excellence. So what we're going to kind of do is walk through what we feel is ways to set up the program, some of the things we've seen as pitfalls along the way, things to be conscious of, and things to build a better cybersecurity program. What we found over the last few years is folks have been taking technology and just deploying it without any real idea of what this is going to do for the business, how it's going to protect the business or help the business. So what we've been helping customers with and what Dave and I have kind of been leading the charge on is helping them build the whole program, everything from the policies all the way up to taking technology and mapping that to specific controls. So Dave, why don't we start talking about the importance of a cybersecurity program? Like, one of the things that I know you're very passionate about it and talk about it a lot, and just, the sheer volume of seeing people without programs.
Yeah, and defining the program itself, right? So to your point earlier, I think what we've done as technologists over the years is plugging the holes in the dam with the specific technologies. So I have an internet connection, I put a firewall in, I have an email system, I implement email security. But we really want to kind of put the brakes on, and because of all the new regulations and compliances and even laws that are coming to fruition here in the United States and in other countries, we want to make sure that we're starting from the beginning, right? So making sure that we are governing our security program from the top down, meaning we want executives of the organization involved because they're essentially running the business from a high level. So we want to make sure that all of our thoughts and all of our planning is actually documented, right? So implementing security by design. So we start with a written information security program, which is referred to as a WISP in short. That's a very high level document that tells the business how we are handling cybersecurity as it pertains to the business, what we're trying to protect. And then that WISP will actually refer to individual, more specific policies like endpoint policies, email policies, acceptable use policies. And what we want to do then is map those policies to the technology to make sure that we're doing what we meant to do, or doing what we sought out to do in the first place, rather than just randomly implementing technical controls, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you said something one time. I'm going to actually do a thing that I use a lot. I quote you as saying this: a cybersecurity program just doesn't involve technology, but the process, people, and policies. And a mature cybersecurity program should be comprehensive, proactive, and adaptive. I don't know if you remember saying that, but it was one of the things you would say keynote or something, and I was like, that is exactly what we're doing.
Well, it's interesting, right? There's a lot of talk about cybersecurity programs and the maturity of said programs. how do we document, or how do we gauge where we're at in the maturation process if we don't have written plans in place? And if we're not applying our plan to a framework, right? Because just like it says, the framework gives you the means to be able to map to something and gauge the maturity of where you're at in complying to that framework. If you're haphazardly implementing security, technical controls to protect yourself, that's all well and good, but how do you report that up to the business to say, we're at 20%, we're at 40%, we're at 60% from a maturation process, mapping to NIST or mapping to HIPAA or mapping to GDPR or what have you. So I think it's very important that we start to, if we're not already, adopting a framework that applies to the nature of our business or businesses, and making sure that we're continually marching forward and creating that program, and making sure that we're striving to be mature with our compliances.
Yeah, and like you said, defining the scope and the purpose of those policies, right? So looking at things like relevant laws, regulations, or more of standards too, affecting your organization, right? So a lot of times, even with the NIST cybersecurity framework, that's for you. That's for you being, good security stewards, really understanding your business. But more importantly, and one of the things that I talk to customers about, and I want to hear your opinion on this too, is protection of intellectual property. So a lot of folks, when their business is their intellectual property, what they do, their secret sauce, and a lot of folks just treat that as regular data. And it's so much more. That is your business. And we're seeing ransomware threats where, you know, espionage used to be just in the movies, right? But it's a real thing now where people are going in and, it's hard to adapt in this modern age. It's hard to spring up. So they're going in and grabbing, intellectual property. So it's important to understand the risk appetite and that tolerance level, right?
Absolutely. I think from an even higher level, when we're working with customers in a consultative capacity, one of the first things we do is start to dig into what is your sensitive data and where is it stored. And I would say 70% of the folks that we're interacting with only have about 50% knowledge of what their sensitive data is and where it's stored, especially with the proliferation of cloud and SaaS applications, to where, a lot of our HR solutions today are SaaS based. And although we like to think that those SaaS based applications are, or those organizations are responsible for our data, they're actually not. We are. So we have to make sure that we're identifying our data, what data is sensitive, how we're protecting it, classifying that data, and then that will eventually bleed into data retention, right? How long do we keep said data? So running across a lot of organizations that aren't really paying attention to what their sensitive data is, whether it's, PII, whether it's IP, customer data, what have you. A lot of folks just don't have a grasp on what their sensitive data is and where it's stored. So that's a big part of running a mature cybersecurity program, is identifying that data.
Yeah, and the pandemic kind of made it worse because folks were, immediately deploying everything to the cloud, trying to migrate, and then you had this data sprawl where, like you said, you had no context of where your data is. I'll talk as a technologist for a second, and one of the things we always try to do is do that comprehensive audit, right, of where everything is and understand, from a risk management practice of where this stuff is. And it like you said, it's surprising on these assessments that folks are like, oh, I had no idea we had data over there. I had no idea that that's still around, and that's, kind of eye-opening to a lot of folks from there.
I would also say that we have to identify who owns the data or who is responsible for the data, right? So if we're backing up and talking about our written plans, we typically recommend that every organization, as part of their cybersecurity program, has a roles and responsibilities matrix. And that includes and leads up to, leadership, right? Owners, COOs, CIOs, CEOs, and then data stewards and data custodians. So who is actually responsible for the data? Because, I'll repeat myself and say that no matter where your data is stored, it's ultimately the responsibility of the organization to pay attention to it and apply some ownership to it, so there's some accountability as well.
That's a good point. Well, let's kind of migrate to compliance and legal considerations. So that's another thing about the data, right? We have laws coming out left and right, and globally, folks, different countries are trying to do their own thing, and a lot of them are, I don't want to say trying to outdo one another, but they're making it so complex that it's hard to figure out where your compliance requirements are. So when I kind of understand, these different laws and regulations, I think it's important to understand what's specific to you. Again, like CCPA with California, right? If you're doing business in California, it's important to abide by those rules. But even if you look deeper into that law, it's if you're doing business with somebody from California, you don't necessarily have to be operating in California, right? Same with, GDPR and a couple other ones. It gets it gets interesting trying to navigate this complex landscape, right? That's where.
Yes, it is getting very convoluted. I think with the sheer amount of cybersecurity attacks that are happening, and the fact that the media is paying a lot more attention to it, and not just social media. I mean, I always refer to 5-6 years ago, you never heard the newscaster mention a firewall, or the last one, CrowdStrike, was mentioned in the news a couple of weeks ago. So the fact that it's becoming more relevant to just the community in general, right? People who are sitting home watching the news, all of these regulations and compliances are popping up all over the place. And I don't know that there's a rhyme or reason to it, other than making sure that we're all protecting ourselves in our job roles, and protecting our company, and protecting our data. The bad news is it's getting very convoluted. There's more and more compliances and regulations coming out. The good news is there's a ton of overlap between them. So to your point, Rick, if as an organization, if we're working with leadership and creating our cybersecurity program, understanding the business, understanding what the business may be required to comply with, pick one. Let's pick one. If we're health, it's easy if we're healthcare because it's HIPAA. If we're a financial, maybe it's Graham Leach, right? GLBA. If we're not too sure, and we're really a private owned company that doesn't have to comply to a specific framework, we can pick NIST. But the good news is that if for some reason, now I've seen most recently that MSPs, much like ourselves, are eventually going to have to comply to CMMC 2.0. But if we are already complying to NIST, and we have that down, 75, 85, 90% compliant to NIST CSF, let's take that for an in general framework. When we are required to map to CMMC 2.0, the technologies that we have nowadays allow us to crosswalk and create some efficiencies of scale to be able to say, well, we're already complying to all of these NIST controls. CMMC, there's a ton of overlap. I don't have to manually go in and crosswalk and spend days, weeks, months doing that. I can have the technology do it for me, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on.
You brought up something earlier, and I kind of want to talk about it here. It's the role of leadership in those cross-functional teams. I know that in all of the engagements I'm on with you, and different talks that you've done and things that you've wrote, that's very important to you. And I think, can you walk through that, like how you feel that's such a strong success factor?
Well, think about the term governance, right? What does that actually mean? It means that we're governing X, right? If we're governing our cybersecurity program, or we're governing our country, or we're governing our towns, there's always a body that's responsible for the governance of said program, right? I think what I've experienced over the years, and it is getting better, is we're not really paying attention to the governance of it, meaning we don't have, as security practitioners, or maybe security executives, if you include the CISO in that executive team, we haven't had a seat at the table. So we've grown up as technologists. We understand security. We understand that we have to use technology to secure our environments, but we haven't done a great job of selling that up to the organization and basically saying, hey, listen, this is something that ownership and leadership should be paying attention to. We should have their thoughts and their support when we want to implement a robust cybersecurity program. And really that team should be governing the cybersecurity program from the top. I don't want to take up too much time, but I often refer to building a building. I was walking through Boston the other day where there's a brand new building going up. There's a bunch of vans outside on the sidewalk, and there's electricians, there's drywall people, there's HVAC people. But if you peek inside, there's a bunch of people in suits, you know, looking at a big table with a plan on it, right? So those folks are governing building that building, and they're following a plan. The folks out on the street, right, that are actually doing the work are involved in it, but it's really the leaders of that, the GC and the architect, that are leading the charge on building that building. And if the plan changes because something affects the plan, we change the plan, we disseminate that down to the team, and they change their, you know, plan of action accordingly. So it's all about planning. It's all about making sure that we have the ear of the business and the stakeholders of the business and their support. And also it bleeds into budget, right? We need this because if we're at high risk of getting breached and our data being compromised, we need budget to be able to protect that. And if we have leadership's ear, it becomes easier, in my opinion.
Agreed. And I think us as technologists, that's one of our biggest challenges, is turning that into a business context, right? And giving the business, you know, if you don't do this, here's X amount of consequences, and you know, this is what it'll cost you from that, and then they have to weigh that and those kinds of things. So I find even myself, you know, it's been a big shift coming from, you know, technologists, hey, here's the ones and zeros, over to business context to understand, you know, what the governance is of that. I want to shift gears a little and talk about something that I know that you're very vocal about, and that is third-party risk management and under identifying and managing, you know, third-party risk. I'll even go as far as saying, you know, we had a recent customer that had it. It's from a third party that affected them immediately. And, you know, it was like, we have all the controls in place. We've done everything that we could. We have a good program, but our third party, you know, caused us issues.
Yeah, I think risk in general is important. To kind of back up the conversation that we just had a minute ago, talking to leadership, we really need to identify as security professionals risk to the organization, right? What is the risk to the organization? And it can be based on recent attacks, but it really should be based on risk to the business financially, risk to the business from a reputational perspective, risk to the business to be able to operate efficiently, right? If we're doing our job in managing risk, we as security professionals are identifying the risk. We're looking at the inherent risk when we show up at the door, and we're presenting that to leadership, right? I mentioned before about having a steering committee or a roles and responsibilities matrix within our organizations as it pertains to security. We should be meeting on a regular basis, you know, quarterly at the very least, with the stakeholders of the business to go over the whole program in its entirety, but to also focus in on the risk. So we showed up at the door, we understand the risk to the organization from these 5, 6, 7, 8 different perspectives is X. So we gauge and we manage that risk. We present it up to the business, and we make them aware that there is a risk to the business if we're not doing things correctly. And that bleeds right down into third-party risk because it's part of it, right? We should be managing organizational risk. We should be managing third-party risk. We should be paying attention to it. We should be applying controls to it. So in there, we can take the inherent risk and have you know, have it bleed into residual risk, to where we've actually applied controls to mitigate the risk. and then continually manage it, right? So risk is very important, obviously, in any GRC program, third-party risk as well.
Yeah, I always, one things that I'm working with customers is make sure that we're integrating a third-party risk into the cybersecurity program. I think that's very important because, again, like I referenced earlier, you can have everything in place for your organization, and then a company you're doing business with doesn't have the same urgency you have, or, they don't have this CEO's ear and they're struggling, and then, they have an issue and it affects you greatly.
Yeah, I think third-party risk in general nowadays is fairly immature. I know everybody on the line here has probably experienced, excuse me, at one time or another, either sending out or receiving a cybersecurity questionnaire as it relates to third-party risk. And I've seen questionnaires that are 60 questions, and I've seen questionnaires that are almost 400 questions. And they're yes or no. I'm not too sure that that's an effective way to manage third-party risk. I do see some movement in the industry where there are solutions that are coming out now that aren't just questionnaire based, but they're actually digging into third parties' security posture by a technical means, right? Whether they're doing a scan, an external scan, an internal scan, or both, to actually, where the rubber meets the road, to say, we did a scan on your domain and we see vulnerabilities from the outside. So you've answered yes to all these questions, although it doesn't look like you're really protecting from a technology perspective. And the insurance companies are starting to do that. So they're using programs like BitSight and Black Kite and what's the other one? Security Scorecard now to have the rubber meet the road and actually verify that these questionnaires that we're filling out are accurate. So I see the questionnaires kind of going away eventually. I think we'd all love that. And I think what you'll see is there'll be a piece of technology that's going to be able to verify and act as evidence for third-party risk.
Yeah, you said they're mature and I kind of immature. I kind of agree with you. But one of the things that I do think is really good is about the unified program, right? So understanding, one, having a place where we can kind of pull everything together, but two, understanding your organizational risk, understanding your third-party risk, and understanding where your data lies, right? So that's really a lot to encompass. And it's hard doing that on spreadsheets. It's hard doing that in isolated programs, specifically, right? So it's kind of that unification to me is important, right? Because you want to streamline your operation, you want to streamline efficiency. But the biggest thing for me is the standardization, right? So if you're in using one piece of software for this and one piece of software for that, you can, without policies, without structure, that could really become daunting really fast.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sprawl from a paperwork perspective, right? To your point of folks that may have a program in place, they're using spreadsheets, they're using Word documents that may be on SharePoint, they may be on somebody's laptop, they may be on another file share somewhere. There's point products that take care of certain aspects of a cybersecurity program. I was with a customer last week. They had 3 different programs that they used, technical SaaS-based programs that they used for different things to manage and govern their cybersecurity program. So it's been a little bit all over the place, and I think the struggle is widespread, and most feel the pain, to where really, as growing up as technologists, we should be reining this in and having a centralized, unified means to be able to manage, govern, and continually improve our cybersecurity programs if we're doing it correctly. And I think the former makes it very hard to, again, report up to leadership. Where are we at? If your CEO came to you tomorrow and said, how mature is your cybersecurity program? How would you answer?
Right.
How would you show them? Right? Well, I have 15 policies over here, and I have this checklist over here, and I have some documents over here. It's really not an efficient means to manage any program, right? So I feel like with the technology that we have, and the skill set that we have, we can more efficiently manage our cybersecurity programs, save us a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, and for me, it's always the mental health part of it, right? You're stressed already. You have this dynamic threat landscape with laws coming at you that have to be followed. You have bad actors coming at you with ransomware, malware. On top of it, you have to report to the business. And if you're disorganized at that thing, the whole thing just starts mushering out, and, your stress levels, it really becomes like, DEFCON 0, right? You're like, oh no.
Yeah, another reason why it's good to have leadership involved in the program, right? Because if something happens, something bad happens, they're going to come after you anyways. So you
Yeah.
might as well try to get a seat at that table and get their ear and have them understand the importance of all of this.
Exactly. As we talk about all the policies and procedures and all of this stuff, I think it's important to recognize the controls and measures we have to put in place. And you hear me talk about this a lot, Dave, is all of these controls should map to each other and talk to each other. Like an example, if you're going to want visibility into your organization to understand what's happening, and having a SIM, that SIM should be able to take all the technologies that you have in place today into it, and also be able to, adapt into the future. A lot of my SIM tools, I like it to have SOAR functionality or some kind of being able to take corrective action on it. I don't, I'm not a big fan of alert storms because I think it makes you immune to it. You get alert fatigue, you get all that. I want something that is going to respond to an action, do something, and give me the ability to understand that action. If it's a day zero, it immediately contains the host, or if it's something, will build a use case for me. The other tool that I think, I always talk to folks about, again, in talking about data sprawl, is having a data loss prevention tool, right? Or something that does data security posture management, to where you can add, a DLP tool on top of it. And that's really where, we'll talk about it in a second, but that's really where your policies, your training, and your awareness programs kind of all come together on there. One of the things that I reference a lot is the tools should be preventive, detective, and corrective, right? That's the model that we have to do, and then map those technologies to controls. Are you kind of seeing the same methodology? I know you and I work together a lot, and you hear me talk about mapping those technologies to controls, and you from the controls down to the technology. Do you see folks kind of understanding how that kind of comes together?
I think so. I think some do. I think there's a large gap in SMB, larger size SMB, mid-market commercial space to where there's nothing, right? So I explain it like this. There's if we take NIST, for example, the terminology that they use, with their categories, subcategories, or controls, subcontrols, and controls. When we talk about controls within the NIST framework, it's a control that we have to satisfy with something, right? That something may be policy, that something may be technology, that something may be both a policy and technology. So that mapping piece is basically saying, okay, well, from the high level, from the top down, when we're mapping to a framework and we're satisfying a NIST control, if I take like IDAM1, right, within NIST, that's a control. That's a NIST control. How are we satisfying that control? That's typically with a piece of technology. So what we want to do for evidence sake, and really for sanity's sake and for reporting's sake, is map the technical control to the NIST control, saying that we are satisfying IDAM1 with this piece of technology. We have it in place, we manage it, we govern it, so we check that box. I think more needs to be done in that area, and I think more and more, when we start getting into the need to comply to any of this stuff, when the auditors come in, that's exactly what they do. They want to see that the NIST control, or like in our case, the SOC control, is requiring something, show me what that something is. I want a piece of evidence when they come in and do the audit. So if folks aren't doing that now, sooner or later they're going to be required to, because sooner or later they're going to be required to be audited.
Yeah, exactly. And that really, again, comes back to the fact of having a unified program, right? So, you're not caught off guard on that. One of the things I want to kind of switch gears a little is on culture, and security awareness programs. I always feel that a lot of folks in this space just do the phishing emails, just do the things that check off a box rather than work on changing the culture, right? I think humans are our weakest link in our security programs, and getting them to understand the importance of protecting their own identity on the network, but more importantly, protecting the customer, the business's information. Um, One of the things that I always stress is developing an effective training program, and then something that can measure how the folks are doing. But again, it's culture, it's everybody. A lot of times we'll see the CEO is not taking security awareness training. Well, that's okay. How do you build a programs for those particular people that are busy? Is it sending them, um, easier to read tutorials? Is it, one-on-one discussions, all of that? But I think it's important that from the top down, that everybody be part of the program. And then, you have the value of um, positive reinforcement there. What's your take on that?
I feel it's one of the most important things. Like you said, uh, they're going after us. They're going after end users now. I mean, there's other ways that they get in, but at the end of the day, it is really the weakest link. Back in the day, they used to go after vulnerable operating systems, right? Because it was easy. There was, technology was in its infancy. There was a lot of holes to be taken advantage of. Nowadays that we're paying more attention to patch management, right? And we're keeping our systems updated, and we have a lot of visibility to vulnerabilities within software. We're plugging those holes rather quickly. But where the bad actors are trying to get in today is the end user, is the individual, and they're getting more and more creative. And to your point, I think a lot of folks are just checking the box with training and awareness. To your point, sending out quick videos on phishing and such. But I think really we need to get our employees, our workforce, more in tune with the things that you shouldn't be doing from a cybersecurity perspective on a daily basis. A colleague of mine had a conference last fall, and they had a QR code on a piece of paper. It said, hey, you can, win a trip to Florida, scan the QR code and sign up. And it was an exercise in training to where it wasn't a real contest, right? They logged the folks that were scanning the QR code. That could have very well been, somebody on the other end gathering your sensitive information and taking advantage of it, right? So there's so many things on a daily basis, social media that you can click on, accounts being taken over. So we really need to spend a little bit more time training our workforce and having them understand that they have to be very careful what they click on and what sites they visit and such.
Yeah, absolutely. As we start winding down, a couple of topics I want to talk about. Incident response. I know that in a lot of our assessments or discussions with customer, a lot of them don't have this, or if they do have it, it hasn't been visited in many years. Um, and to me, again, it comes back to awareness and training, right? And training the employees on their roles and responsibility in an incident response plan. Can you share your ideas or your thoughts on incident response as a whole and the readiness aspect of it?
Yeah, I believe everybody needs an incident response plan, a very comprehensive, excuse me, incident response plan. And again, it needs to involve leadership of the organization. Even if something trivial happens, like there was a phishing email that made it through and somebody clicked on it, We need to be paying attention to that. We need to be following the incident response plan. So when a major event happens, we're not running around in chaos mode trying to figure out what to do next. And it involves things that a lot of folks don't think about, right? It does involve leadership of the organization. Who's going to make the decision? I think really what should be being done, aside from the roles and responsibilities matrix within any organization, is we need an incident response team, right? Because a single security technologist can't handle it on their own. So we always recommend that you create an incident response team and you have an incident response manager that's responsible for the whole thing, because again, it maps back to accountability. If we don't have any of this in place and something bad happens, at the end of the day, there's no paper trail. There's no way to figure out what happened. There's nobody that can be held responsible. Therefore, we can't improve, right? We can't be continuously improving and improving our plans if we don't have a plan. That said, once an incident response plan is drafted and agreed upon within the organization, we should actually be testing that, right? So they call those tabletop exercises. We do that with our client base as well, to where we say, well, we've helped you draft an incident response plan, or you have an incident response plan. Let's do a tabletop exercise where we're just going to randomly inject an incident into the mix and see how you guys react to it, right? Because if we're not doing that, we can't figure out if our plan is robust enough to support any kind of incident, right? And if it isn't, through those tabletop exercises, we'll realize that, and then we can improve the plan. And there's even technologies around that space nowadays that can mimic your environment all the way down to configurations on, firewalls and such. So, having an incident response plan, making sure that it's up to date, making sure that you're talking to your insurance companies and have breach coaches and forensics teams in place if something happens, and then, testing that plan and continually improving it.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, I had a customer I was talking to the other day. He said, well, I'm too small for that. And I'm like, you're taking on the risk for the whole business. Why would you do that? Why would you not spread it out and help? It's their business, right? And once I made him aware of that, it was interesting, eye-opening, I guess is the better way to say it. Because a lot of these, directors of technologies and that aren't CISOs and stuff take on the whole load of the company and say, if there's an incident, it's on me. Why would you do that? Have an incident response plan. You're in charge of this. You're in charge of that. This is your domain over here.
Yeah, I could go on about incident response plan for forever, but I disagree with too small, right? Last year, small municipality in New Hampshire got hit and they got $2 million out of them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's no longer the size of the company or the revenue of the company, because we're insuring ourselves for millions of dollars when it comes to cybersecurity insurance. So really anybody who has cybersecurity insurance is a target because they know they can get the money out of them. Right? And the quicker that we remediate, it lessens the ability of the bad actors to actually get in there and take advantage of us if we're doing it right. It all bleeds together and creates that robust program. If we're not doing all of it, we're not doing it right.
Speaking of which, I want to talk about utilizing or leveraging emerging technologies. So, I'm a big technologist. I love, new technology. But one of the things I always stress with, don't buy technology for technology's sake, but just understand the impact of these emerging technologies to your business. So, understand what AI or machine learning or blockchain is going to give you, but also what it may induce in your network. We've seen a lot of times where folks, will, introduce something, like a behavioral anomaly detection or something like that, that is just all of a sudden turned on so many alerts that they're, fatigued. So we want to make sure that, they're thought out. When we talk to customers about that, we, look through, what's the reasoning behind it? What are you trying to get out of it? Now, there are great things, I don't really like talking about products on this call, but, things like, the extra hop reveal or dark trace or any of the NDRs are important tools, because they use deep packet inspection and protocol parsing, but just understand why you're doing them and what you're going to gain out of it. You have anything to add on that one, Dave?
No, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
I know you've heard me talk about it a lot, but I've seen folks go, "Hey, I just saw
I,
XYZ on the website. I'm gonna have a demo."
I hesitate just because the middle section there, we talk about AI and machine learning. That's another rabbit hole that we go down nowadays. And I think folks are just figuring that out. It's going to be one of our biggest challenges in the coming years, dealing with that.
Yeah, thanks. I kind of want to wrap up here on the monitoring and continuous improvement. Again, kind of wrapping everything together. Prepare for your cybersecurity incidents. Again, IR plan, written information security policy. Make sure you have those detailed recovery steps, right? You want to make sure that you're effective in your incident response and that you know what the heck's going on. I always say, the impact is as big as you make it, right? So if you have a plan, you know what's going on, no matter what's coming at you, um, you can be in front of it. Make sure you're testing. Exercises, we talked about that. Tabletops, maybe if you're a complex environment, you do something with a cyber range, but regular testing is really important. Having drills are something that I stress, a lot on. As we wrap up here, I kind of want to show, again, I try not to show too much sales on this thing, but one of the things I wanted to show, and I know Dave's behind this, we built this platform that we refer to as GRACE, which is the Governor's Risk Compliance Engine platform. But what I want to showcase on this is it took a while to do it, but it's everything that we talked about today, right? We want to take the guesswork out of building a cybersecurity program. And we found that there wasn't that one tool that we talked about. So we really wanted to kind of put that into place. And what this tool essentially is once you pick a framework, we can build, manage, and report on that particular program. And then, take a deeper dive into each control and then map the technology to the controls. Dave, I know this is one of your one of your babies behind there. I'm interested to get your take on this.
Basically, it gives us the means to govern our security programs, report up to leadership where we're at from a maturation process. It allows us to have a centralized document repository so we can store all of our policies here. We can edit them. We can map them back to frameworks. We can report on those. We can manage organizational risk through the program. We can manage third-party risk through the program. And it just gives us the means to more efficiently, I would even say create for a lot of our clients that don't have programs in place. This gives us the means to efficiently create a cybersecurity program for them and then continuously manage it and maintain it for them as well. And we can do as little or as much as you like. So we have a lot of consultative services that help our clients create and or manage and continually improve their security programs.
Yeah, one of the things I just saw you did this the other day is being able to do multiple compliance programs because the customer was talking about, they were heading down the road for one thing and they realized within the next year they may have to have a second one. And, I think you put them at ease saying, oh, don't worry about that. We could just crosswalk this and, then the additional controls we can focus in on. And I could see the relief on their face because they're like, oh no, I'm gonna have to do this again.
And oh, by the way, right? If I talk about NIST CSF 2.0 or CMMC 2.0, what's the 2.0 mean? The
Yeah.
frameworks evolve as well. So once we're mapping to a framework and there's a version 2.0 or 3.0, now we have to relearn the whole thing. So putting some automation around cybersecurity programs with a platform like Grace in concert with our consultative services provides the means to do it in a more efficient manner, to save time and energy, to be able to report and show the value. It just makes sense.
Yeah. Dave, thanks so much for joining us today, man. This was, again, we could have 2 hour session. I do want to take you up on the incident response one in our weekly, I'm sorry, our monthly coffee chats, because I think it's important and I know you're so passionate about it. Next month, folks, our next one on April 17th is navigating the marketplaces. I'll be joined by a really nice guy that I used to do a podcast with. It's awesome. Hit us up with GRC workshop questions. Dave and I are always available. You can reach out to our marketing folks as well. There is a session recording. I'm going to make sure that you get these slides. You can get the session recordings. I think we're sending a link. We have it on YouTube, right? And then I'm just going to wrap up here with, coffee chat series are topics what matter to you. So if you guys have any ideas, send it to me and Dave. Hit us up on social media. Hit marketing up on social media. Rachel, thank you so much for everything today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick and Dave. This was a really, really great conversation. And I can tell you could just keep talking about it forever. Unfortunately, we got to cut you off. But yes, feel free to reach out to them if you have any more questions. They are so knowledgeable in all of this. So definitely utilize that expertise that they offer. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I'm really excited about the one on April 17th. We're going to have Rob DeLeon, Rick's old podcast partner. I think they're still podcasting too. So yeah, you could definitely ask them questions about that as well. So have a great, wonderful day, wonderful rest of your day, guys.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye.